This episode is supported by MonsterJoysticks.com. Level up your Raspberry Pi with our all-in-one arcade kit using genuine Sanwa arcade parts. And OneClickPrint.com for your photos on canvas, acrylic, gifts and more. Local craftsmen and global delivery.
Hello Cave Dwellers, welcome to The Cave and the continuation of our series on the restoration of the humble PC Engine. You know, sometimes I do these Trash to Treasure series and I work on a system that I've not worked on before. I'll be all excited about working on it. And before long, it dawns on me just how limited the machine is, or how limited the software library is for the machine. And I come to a realization that yes, it's really nice to restore it and it's nice to tell its story, but at the end of it, can I use it for much? A lot of machines will end up on the shelf, not to be used again, or rarely to be used. That is not the case with the PC Engine. The more I work on this, the more familiar I get with the software library, the more excited I get about it. This is a stonking machine which I dismissed for too long because it had the label of an 8-bit console. And this, I'm finding more and more, really does give those 16-bit consoles a run for their money. Even more so today, if we can get the CD ROM unit working, because that opens up a whole nother world, a whole nother software library with a huge amount of storage space compared to the Hue card. In part 1, we got the PC Engine itself working. Today, in part 2, it's the turn of the CD ROM ROM, and we'll also have to have a little look at the joypad because that's given me problems. So let's get this straight over to the workbench and let's see if we can get this whole thing working as a complete unit.
So yes, the CD ROM ROM is the focus of our attention today, dating from 1988. It's the system on which we saw the first ever commercially released video games on a CD anywhere. For that reason alone, it's well worth preserving, I think. It can work as a standalone unit with a line out on the back to send the audio out, as well as a headphone port and a volume control knob up front. So this isn't just for games. You can pop CDs in, you can pop your music CDs in for a listen, although I see no mention of skip protection or buffering, so it's not something that you would take out on your roller skates, as I so often do. No, I'm no detective, but it's fair to assume that this broken cog taped onto the top of the unit is going to need replacing. Hopefully any others that are still in there are holding up okay, because I do have a replacement right here for this cog. Here it is in this bag, but I don't have spares for any other cogs that may be in there, so fingers crossed. But let's open the unit up and we'll see exactly what we're working with today. As we open the unit, there are no cables to be worried about coming away with the bottom half of it. We can just lift it off to reveal the underside of the mainboard, which doesn't really tell us a great deal. But the previous owner has been in here to fish out that broken cog, and they've left 2 ribbon cables detached. No doubt they were expecting to return to finish the job at some point. But if you're opening it up, just be careful. You may need to carefully detach these before pulling the system board away, or you'll risk damaging them. That's this big cable here, and then there's a small one on the other side. Then it's just one screw to remove, and then we lift out the board and reveal the CD mechanism. You can detach the system board if you need to, but I think I've got enough slack here to lay each half flat next to each other while I work on it. But for reference, you can see here where each color-coded cable goes if you need to figure that out for yourself. Now, the mechanism itself is a standard affair which will be familiar to anyone who's opened up a CD player. We've got our motor here. That turns the gears, one of which is missing of course, and that in turn turns a worm screw which drives the sled back and forward. And I'm pleased to say the remaining cogs do look just fine, so let's fit our replacement missing cog. And there it is, behaving happily, moving now when we rotate the cogs. I guess you could call it cog behavioural therapy. So providing our motor is in good order, I think this should work. I have noticed though while working on it that there is some old grease, and it's good to keep the screw and the rail greased, but after 30 years it's not a bad idea to refresh that grease. So I'm using some IPA and a cotton bud and a small brush as well, or a toothbrush, to dig out all of that old grease and get it all nice and clean. And once we're happy it's clean, we can put some fresh grease on both the screw and the rail on the other side. I've actually got a bit grease happy here and slapped a little bit too much on, but we can take off the excess and you'll see me do that shortly. And there we go, we've got some lovely fresh grease on for a nice smooth moving mechanism. So let's now put it all back together, connecting up those two ribbon cables carefully, and we'll see if we've got a working CD ROM ROM. Into the interface unit it all goes then, and in order for all this to work together we need to use a special hue card. In my case I have the Super System card. There are 3 CD ROM formats for the PC Engine: CD ROM ROM, Super CD ROM ROM and Arcade CD ROM ROM, and the corresponding hue card is needed for these formats. So with the Super card I can access the majority of the titles, as there were only 9 titles for the later Arcade card. And if you try and run a title with the wrong card in, there is actually a whole library of weird and wonderful warning screens that you may be presented with. Here are just a few examples. The Super CD-ROM hue card contains additional RAM needed for the CD games, hence its chunkier size. Now, not having used one of these before, I wasn't sure what the behaviour was to expect. I got a white screen, so do we just press play on the CD? I'm not sure. But I began my testing with an audio CD first, just to see if the CD player was working regardless of the PC Engine, and for that I grabbed the nearest CD with an audio track on, and that was Daytona USA from the Sega Saturn. Track 3 is that song everybody loves from the arcade, so let's see if it can play some music. Well, that's a good sign, but what of our games? I called my PC Engine owning friend Gary at this point, and he told me that there should be a splash screen when you turn it on with just the hue card in, so I gave it a good clean with some IPA. Even if they look clean, these hue cards do seem to be susceptible to dirt if you're not careful with them, so it's well worth keeping them clean and perhaps getting some protective storage cases to put them in when you're not using them. Let's see what happens this time then. And yes, we have a splash screen this time, much more promising, although my joypad is being a bit temperamental. What better test then than No Reco? No Reco, is that what it's called? I'm sure you'll correct me. Which alongside Fighting Street were the first 2 CD-based video games ever sold in 1988. I'm not going to play it because I haven't got the foggiest idea how, but it seemed like a nice way to test it. And as you can see, it seems to be working. So let's try some games that I've burned onto a CD to test this out. You can really see how the CD-based music enhances some of these titles. R-Type in particular was exceptional to play, and Prince of Persia was incredibly colourful. It's easy to forget that this is an 8-bit system. And it's not just music, there are many other enhancements that come with the extra storage available on the CD. One game that was developed for the system was a port of Shadow of the Beast, worked on by Mike Daly of Lemmings and Grand Theft Auto fame, who I was lucky enough to interview. And here's a short extract of his memories of working on that game and a small insight into how the PC Engine CD ROM ROM worked.
So the machine itself, PC Engine was an amazing machine, ballistically quick. I'd come from a 1 megahertz 6502 and then gone to this 7 megahertz 65C02. So I had more instructions and 7 times the speed. I mean, if you can imagine these days going onto a PC that was 7 times faster, it's ballistically quick. So the actual machine was great fun. The game, however, wasn't. It took way too long. It changed massively over the course of its evolution. We started out doing just a straight port. Steve was doing a lot of the graphics for it. And we were taking some of the Amiga stuff over. And NEC, who was doing the contract diagnosis, they kind of came up and went through, and they just didn't want it to be the same as the Amiga at all. They wanted it to be enhanced and so on. So it ended up moving from just a straight PC Engine cartridge to their new CD ROM system. And that was incredibly complicated. The CD ROM system didn't have anything like directory structures or anything like that. It just had a big disk and you had like direct indexes to files and stuff. It was a nightmare. It did, however, have the biggest hard drive we'd ever seen at the time. Back then we'd be dealing with 20 or 40 megabyte hard drives, I think was the biggest we got. And we got shipped this huge 720 meg SCSI hard drive. I mean, it was, massively thick. It was like 2 drives thick kind of thing. So the whole office was kind of gathered round to see it, because it was just insane.
But still, presumably that would hold the development tools and then the capacity of one single CD-ROM in that.
I know, that was just for the CD.
Just for the CD, wow.
Yeah, so all the dev tools were still on the normal PC. This was a separate disk that sat in the machine to emulate the actual hard drive of the CD-ROM stuff. And it was just insane.
This is all well and good, but I was constantly having problems with the joypad while testing this out. There's nothing for it, we're going to have to strip it down and take a look. I also have the new Monster joystick they released recently for the PC Engine, so we'll see that in episode 3, but it will be nice to get this original joypad working. The cable seems fine as the strain relief is doing its job here, and this is typical of a joypad of the era. It's made up of rubber buttons which close a circuit on the PCB using a conductive carbon backing on the underside of those rubber pads. Reasons why presses might not register are that the switch is dirty or that the carbon has worn out, so there's not actually enough conductive material to close the switch. We'll see if it's just dirt that's given us a problem by giving the whole board a fingertip clean with some IPA, paying particular attention to those round black areas. Those are the switches that need to be closed. With the PCB cleaned up, who knows how many hands have touched this pad over 30 years, how many sticky sweets and snotty noses have been near it. I'd be disappointed if they hadn't, to be honest. This should have given a lot of people a lot of happy memories, but I'd rather not have to touch those memories, thank you very much. So it's all getting a good scrub. Finally, the CD ROM ROM, while a little creamier than the PC Engine, isn't yellow enough to really warrant retrobrighting, so I just gave it a really good clean down while it was still assembled, getting into all the nooks and crannies and also giving the laser lens a clean while we're at it. And I have to say, it came up surprisingly well. It's amazing what a difference a little bit of soap can do.
And there then is our complete working PC Engine in the interface unit with the CD ROM ROM. We've come a long way in a short space of time. The interface unit has a lid, incidentally. If I put that on there like that, make sure it's securely in. We've got a little handle. There it is. And we've got a PC Engine briefcase. How cool is that? I love it. Now, I'm really not doing it justice by showing you this on a flat panel TV. We need to get this hooked up to a CRT, I think, to do it justice. And we want to do that with RGB outputs to get the best possible picture that we can. Now, as I mentioned during the series, there's only a composite out on the interface unit. We want to use the interface unit because we've got the CD-ROM system in there. So what I've ordered is an RGB amp so that hopefully we can open up this unit in part 3. We can hook into the RGB outputs, and it will be a slightly destructive mod, but I think it's justified. We'll just put couple of holes in the back to add RGB outputs on the interface unit. I'm not quite sure where we'll do that yet. If I can do it in a non-destructive way, I'll find a way of doing it, but I think we will have to drill holes. And then we've got everything we need. The CD-ROM, the RGB output, everything working, and we can really enjoy the PC Engine software library and get to know it. I'm furiously burning CDs to play on this thing. So far, 90% of them are working perfectly. I have found on occasion when it tries to seek for an audio track in certain games like Fighting Street, the game will start, you'll get into the game, it will try and find the audio track, and then it will freeze and it will seek back and forward every now and then trying to find that track, and it just can't find it. Now, it could be that we need to look further into the CD-ROM unit, maybe we need to recap it, maybe there's some calibration needed. Or it could just be the simple thing of the CDR media that I'm using. So I've ordered some higher quality CDR media. Let's get the simple things out the way first, and I'll report back to you in part 3 if that solved the problem. Also, it's recommended that you burn the CDs at the slowest speed possible, 2 speed if possible. My CD writer only goes down as low as 8 speed, but that should be okay if we've got decent media. So I'll keep trying that out, and I'll let you know how I get on with that. In the meantime, though, plenty is working. I'm just so impressed with this. I will continue to be impressed with this in part 3, I think. And if you've got any more recommendations of games that I should play, let me know in the comments, because the PC Engine Mini has now come out. I've seen that it's being shipped to some people. So no doubt some of you out there are also getting more familiar with the games library for it. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it today. Take care and see you next time.